London Has Fallen is a 2016 American political action thriller film that comes from the United States, produced primarily through American studios, though the story itself is set entirely across the city of London, England. The film was directed by Babak Najafi, a Swedish-Iranian filmmaker who took over directing duties from Antoine Fuqua, who had helmed the first installment. The screenplay was written by a team of 4 writers: Creighton Rothenberger, Katrin Benedict, Chad St. John, and Christian Girdgast, with Rothenberger and Benedict also credited for the original story. London Has Fallen serves as the direct sequel to the 2013 hit Olympus Has Fallen and stands as the second chapter in what would eventually become the larger Has Fallen film franchise, later followed by Angel Has Fallen in 2019. The film was released theatrically in the United States on March 4, 2016, distributed by Focus Features under a revived version of their genre-focused label, Gramercy Pictures. Principal photography for the movie began in London on October 24, 2014, with filming continuing through a Christmas break and resuming into early 2015, ultimately wrapping in April of that year. Alongside London, portions of the production also took place in India and Bulgaria, with Bulgaria's Boyana Film Studios standing in for several key locations, while other scenes were filmed at the historic Pinewood Studios and at Somerset House in central London. The film reunites much of the original cast from Olympus Has Fallen, led once again by Gerard Butler in the starring role, alongside Aaron Eckhart and Morgan Freeman, with new additions including Charlotte Riley, Alona Balbul, and Walid Zwaiter joining the ensemble. Composer Trevor Morris, who scored the first film, returned to compose the music for the sequel as well. London Has Fallen carries forward the high-stakes premise of the franchise, this time transporting the action from the White House to the streets of London, turning one of the world's most iconic cities into the backdrop for an enormous, coordinated terrorist assault during a moment when the globe's most powerful leaders are gathered together in one place. Plot details. The story of London Has Fallen begins in the aftermath of a sudden and unexpected event, the death of the British Prime Minister, whose passing sets off a chain of events that draws the world's most powerful leaders to London for his state funeral. Secret Service agent Mike Banning, once again portrayed by Gerard Butler, is tasked with accompanying President Benjamin Asher, played by Aaron Eckhart, on this diplomatic and deeply symbolic trip overseas. What begins as a solemn occasion of mourning and international unity quickly transforms into chaos, as it becomes clear that the Prime Minister's death was not a natural occurrence at all, but rather the opening move of an elaborate and meticulously planned terrorist operation. The mastermind behind this scheme is revealed to be Amir Barkawi, a ruthless international arms dealer and terrorist leader played by Alona Balbul, who is working alongside his son Cameron, portrayed by Walid Zwaiter. Barkawi's motivations are deeply personal and rooted in vengeance, stemming from a prior American military strike that killed members of his family during an arms deal, and he has spent years quietly orchestrating an act of retribution on a massive scale. As the funeral proceeds in London, with numerous heads of state from across the globe in attendance, the city is suddenly and violently thrown into disarray as a coordinated wave of attacks begins to unfold. Structures across London are targeted and destroyed in rapid succession, security forces are ambushed by militants disguised in official uniforms, and several world leaders are killed in a series of shocking and brutal set pieces. Amid the pandemonium, Mike Banning's singular focus becomes the protection of President Asher, and the two find themselves cut off from official channels of support, forced to navigate the increasingly hostile and unfamiliar streets of London on their own. As their situation grows more desperate, they seek refuge with Jacqueline, Jax, Marshall, an MI6 agent played by Charlotte Riley, whom Banning has a prior professional relationship with and trusts implicitly in this moment of crisis. It is through Jax's resources and intelligence that Banning and Asher begin to understand the true scale and origin of the conspiracy unfolding around them, discovering that the attack has been meticulously planned for a long time, and that Barkawi's network has infiltrated deep into supposedly secure channels of communication and security. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Vice President Alan Trumbull, played by Morgan Freeman, along with other senior officials including Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan, portrayed by Melissa Leo, and General Edward Clegg, played by Robert Forster, scrambled to coordinate a response from afar, working urgently to try and extract the president and to identify the true architects of the assault before it can claim its ultimate target. As Banning and Asher attempt to make their way to safety, they are met with a series of increasingly dangerous obstacles, including a moment where seemingly friendly rescue forces turn out to be terrorist imposters, forcing Banning to rely purely on his instincts and battlefield experience to keep the president alive. The film escalates into a series of intense confrontations across various iconic London locations, blending espionage, hand-to-hand combat, and large-scale destruction as Banning fights to keep Asher out of the hands of Barkawi's forces, who ultimately intend to broadcast the president's execution live to the world as the final and most devastating blow of their operation. As the true scope of the conspiracy comes into focus, it becomes clear that this was never simply an act of random terrorism, but a calculated and deeply personal act of revenge that has been years in the making, one designed specifically to strike at the heart of American and British power on the world stage. The film builds toward a climactic confrontation in which Banning must use every resource available to him, alongside his growing alliance with Jax and the support finally arriving from Trumbull's coordinated efforts back home, to rescue President Asher and dismantle Barkawi's operation before the world witnesses a horror it will never forget. Throughout the film, themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and the personal cost of political violence are woven into the high-octane action, with Banning's own family life, including his wife Leah played by Radha Mitchell and their newborn child, serving as a quiet emotional anchor that grounds the otherwise relentless pace of the film's espionage and combat sequences. Cast. The film is led by Gerard Butler in the role of Mike Banning, the hardened and fiercely loyal Secret Service agent whose singular mission throughout the film is the protection of the President of the United States, no matter the cost. Aaron Eckhart returns as President Benjamin Asher, portraying a leader who finds himself thrust into a deeply personal fight for survival on foreign soil, far from the resources and safety of his own country. Morgan Freeman reprises his role as Vice President Alan Trumbull, providing the steady, authoritative presence back in Washington as the crisis unfolds overseas. Angela Bassett returns as Lynn Jacobs, the director of the Secret Service, once again serving as a key figure coordinating the protective response around the president. Alon Aboutbol plays Amir Barkawi, the calculating and vengeful terrorist mastermind whose personal vendetta drives the entire plot of the film, while Walid Zwader portrays his son Cameron Barkawi, who assists in carrying out his father's plan. Charlotte Riley joins the cast as Jacqueline, Jax, Marshall, the MI6 agent who becomes an essential ally to Banning and Asher as they attempt to survive the unfolding chaos in London. Robert Forster appears as General Edward Clegg, Melissa Leo returns as Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan, and Jackie Earle Haley reprises his role as Deputy Chief Mason, all of whom contribute to the coordinated crisis response from within the American government. Radha Mitchell returns as Leah Banning, Mike's wife, whose presence in the story adds a layer of personal stakes to Banning's relentless efforts to survive and return home. Sean O'Brien appears as NSA Deputy Director Ray Monroe, Colin Salmon plays Chief Hazard, and Mehdi Dabi portrays Sultan Mansur, rounding out a cast that blends returning franchise veterans with a number of new additions specific to this London set installment. The film was directed by Babak Najafi, with cinematography handled by Ed Wild, production design by Joel Collins, and costume design by Stephanie Colley, while casting for the film was overseen by Elaine Granger. Release date: London Has Fallen was officially released in theaters across the United States on March 4, 2016, distributed by Focus Features under their revived Gramercy Pictures banner. The film opened against stiff competition that same weekend, going head-to-head with the animated hit Zootopia, ultimately finishing in second place at the domestic box office during its opening frame. Despite facing a difficult release window, the film performed strongly overseas and went on to gross more worldwide than its predecessor, cementing the commercial viability of the franchise and setting the stage for a further sequel. Following its theatrical run, London Has Fallen was subsequently released on Blu-ray and DVD on June 14, 2016, allowing audiences around the world continued access to the film through home media formats. Behind the film and additional details. London Has Fallen represents a fascinating case study in modern action filmmaking, particularly in how it attempts to translate the claustrophobic, single-location intensity of its predecessor into a much larger, more geographically sprawling canvas. Where Olympus Has Fallen confined its action almost entirely to the White House complex, London Has Fallen expands its scope dramatically, using the historic streets, bridges, and landmarks of London as both a backdrop and, in many ways, a character in its own right. The decision to film extensively on location in London, alongside additional production work in Bulgaria and India, reflects the growing trend among mid-budget action franchises to chase visual authenticity and scale while working within tighter financial constraints than their blockbuster counterparts. The production faced its own share of logistical challenges, including securing filming permissions around some of London's most recognizable and heavily protected sites, a task that required careful coordination with local authorities given the film's subject matter involving large-scale simulated attacks on the city. Director Babak Najafi, coming into the franchise after Antoine Fuqua's departure, brought his own sensibilities to the material, having built a reputation in Scandinavian cinema before making the transition to major Hollywood action filmmaking. His approach leaned heavily into fast-paced, almost relentless pacing, with the film's second half in particular structured as an extended chase and evasion sequence through the city, culminating in an ambitious continuous tracking shot near the film's climax that became one of the more discussed technical achievements of the production. The film's premise, centered on a coordinated terrorist assault during a state funeral attended by world leaders, taps into very real anxieties about the vulnerability of high-profile diplomatic gatherings, echoing genuine security concerns that governments around the world grapple with whenever heads of state assemble in one place. This kind of scenario, while heightened for cinematic effect, draws on a long history of security planning nightmares that real intelligence agencies have had to consider, particularly in the post-9/11 era where the coordination of multiple simultaneous attacks became a defining fear of modern counterterrorism strategy. The film's antagonist, Amir Barkawi, and the motivations given to his character also reflect a broader trend in action cinema of the 2010s, where villains were increasingly given personal, vengeance-driven backstories tied to the collateral damage of Western military intervention, a narrative choice that added a layer of moral complexity even within an otherwise straightforward action framework. Critically, London Has Fallen received a considerably harsher reception than its predecessor, with many reviewers taking issue with its handling of political and cultural themes, though it nonetheless found a receptive audience among fans of the first film and of large-scale, unapologetic action cinema more broadly. Commercially, the film proved to be a success, outperforming Olympus Has Fallen at the global box office and validating the studio's decision to continue expanding the franchise, which would go on to include a third installment, Angel Has Fallen, released in 2019, with further sequels continuing to be developed in the years since. The film's score, composed once again by Trevor Morris, plays a significant role in sustaining the tension throughout its runtime, blending traditional orchestral action cues with more urgent, percussion-driven sequences that mirror the film's relentless pacing. Taken as a whole, London Has Fallen stands as a bold, if divisive, expansion of its franchise, one that took considerable creative and logistical risks by relocating its entire narrative to a foreign capital, and in doing so, delivered a distinctly different kind of action experience from the one that first introduced audiences to Mike Banning and his singular unwavering dedication to protecting the President of the United States at any cost. One of the most defining aspects of London Has Fallen is the sheer scale of its destruction sequences, particularly the opening act, in which numerous London landmarks are shown falling under simultaneous attack within the span of just a few minutes of screen time. This rapid, almost overwhelming barrage of destruction was a deliberate choice by the filmmakers, designed to immediately establish the scope of Barkawi's operation and to strip away any sense of safety or security the audience might otherwise associate with a city as familiar and iconic as London. The visual language of the film leans heavily on juxtaposing recognizable, peaceful imagery of the city, its bridges, its government buildings, its streets filled with pedestrians and dignitaries, against sudden and jarring violence, a contrast that filmmakers in the action genre have long used to heighten emotional impact. The centerpiece action sequence of the film, often cited as its most technically impressive achievement, is an extended tracking shot that follows Mike Banning through a chaotic urban environment as he moves from one confrontation to the next without a visible cut. This kind of continuous shot requires extensive choreography, coordination between stunt performers, camera operators, and special effects teams, and multiple rehearsals to execute safely and convincingly, and it represents the kind of technical ambition that action filmmakers increasingly pursued throughout the 2010s as a way of distinguishing their work in an increasingly crowded genre. Beyond the technical achievement, this sequence also serves a narrative purpose, immersing the audience directly into Banning's relentless, almost single-minded state of mind as he cuts through wave after wave of threats with mechanical efficiency, reinforcing his characterization as a nearly unstoppable force once his protective instincts are triggered. The character dynamics between Banning and Asher. A significant part of what grounds London Has Fallen amid its large-scale action is the ongoing relationship between Mike Banning and President Asher, a dynamic that had already been firmly established in the first film and is deepened considerably here. Their relationship moves beyond a simple professional arrangement between protector and protected, evolving into something that resembles genuine friendship and mutual trust, tested repeatedly under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. Asher, despite holding the most powerful political office in the story, is repeatedly placed in situations of profound vulnerability, stripped of the usual apparatus of state power, security details, and communication networks that would typically surround a sitting president. This vulnerability humanizes the character in a way that contrasts sharply with the more traditionally commanding, authoritative portrayal audiences might expect from a fictional American president, and it places a great deal of narrative weight on Banning's shoulders as the sole line of defense between Asher and a violent death. The film uses quieter character moments, brief exchanges between the two men amid the chaos, to explore themes of duty, mortality, and the strange intimacy that develops between individuals who have shared extreme trauma together. These moments, while brief, serve to balance the film's relentless action with brief pauses that remind the audience of the human stakes underlying the spectacle. The role of Jacqueline Jax Marshall. Charlotte Riley's character, MI6 agent Jacqueline Jax Marshall, serves as a crucial addition to the cast for this installment, providing both a local perspective within the London setting and a professional counterpart to Banning from outside the American intelligence apparatus. Her character is written to be resourceful, sharp, and deeply capable, someone who Banning trusts implicitly despite the extraordinary circumstances, and her presence allows the film to explore the practical realities of how British and American intelligence services might cooperate during a crisis of this magnitude. Jax's safe house becomes a critical turning point in the story, offering Banning and Asher a brief moment of relative safety and the tools necessary to begin piecing together the true nature of the conspiracy against them. Her character also serves a broader function within the franchise's world building, hinting at the kind of international cooperation and shared intelligence networks that exist behind the scenes of major diplomatic events, even when those networks are ultimately compromised or outmaneuvered by a sufficiently determined adversary such as Barkawi. The franchise context and its evolution. London Has Fallen occupies an important position within the broader Has Fallen franchise, representing a pivotal moment where the series had to decide how to build upon the success of its first installment without simply repeating the same formula. By relocating the action from Washington to London, the filmmakers signaled an intention to expand the scope and ambition of the series, testing whether audiences would embrace Mike Banning as a character capable of operating effectively outside of his home turf and the highly controlled environment of the White House. This decision ultimately proved successful enough commercially to justify continuing the franchise, leading to the development of Angel Has Fallen, which would go on to further evolve Banning's character and explore new dimensions of his personal and professional life. The trajectory of the franchise as a whole reflects broader patterns within Hollywood action cinema, where successful original films are followed by sequels that attempt to escalate scale and stakes while searching for new settings and antagonists to keep the core premise feeling fresh. London Has Fallen's willingness to take creative risks with its setting and its willingness to lean into large-scale, almost apocalyptic destruction set a tone that would influence the visual and narrative ambitions of the franchise's subsequent installment. Final thoughts on the film's legacy. Looking back, London Has Fallen occupies an interesting place in the broader landscape of 2010's action cinema, a film that leaned unapologetically into old-fashioned, high-octane spectacle at a time when the genre was increasingly dominated by superhero franchises and more restrained, grounded thrillers. Its willingness to embrace over-the-top action, relentless pacing, and a straightforward hero versus villain narrative structure gave it a distinct identity within the marketplace, even as it drew criticism for its handling of certain themes and its sometimes simplistic characterization of its antagonists. For fans of pure, unfiltered action filmmaking, the movie delivered exactly what it promised: a relentless, high-stakes thrill ride built around one of modern action cinema's most reliably intense leading men in Gerard Butler. Its box office performance, which exceeded that of its predecessor, demonstrated that there remained a substantial audience appetite for this kind of large-scale, government conspiracy-driven action thriller, paving the way for the franchise to continue expanding in the years that followed. The complete story of London Has Fallen begins long before the assault on the British capital, in a sequence that establishes the true origin of the vengeance that will eventually consume an entire city. The film opens far from London, in a dusty, sun-scorched region near the border of Pakistan, where an American drone strike targets a compound believed to house a dangerous arms dealer. The strike is precise, devastating, and from the perspective of the American military officials who ordered it, entirely justified as a strategic necessity in the ongoing war against global terrorism networks. What the strike actually destroys, however, is not merely a hideout of weapons and fighters, but the wedding celebration of Amir Barkawi's daughter, a joyous family gathering transformed in an instant into a scene of unimaginable devastation. Barkawi survives the attack, badly wounded and utterly changed, cradling the aftermath of a tragedy that has claimed members of his family and shattered whatever remained of his connection to any life outside of vengeance. From this single, brutal moment, the entire architecture of the film's central conflict is built. Barkawi does not see himself as a terrorist acting without reason. In his own mind, he is a father and a man who has been wronged in the most profound way possible by the very government that will, 2 years later, gather its allies together in London to bury a fallen head of state. This origin sequence is brief, but its emotional weight lingers over everything that follows, giving the film's antagonist a motivation rooted not in abstract ideology alone, but in personal loss and an unrelenting desire to make the architects of that loss suffer as he has suffered. 2 years pass, and the story shifts entirely to a different rhythm, one of domestic normalcy and quiet family life. Mike Banning, the hardened Secret Service agent whose unwavering loyalty to President Benjamin Asher was tested to its absolute limit during the events of the first film, is shown attempting to settle into a life outside of constant danger. He is married to Leah, and the two are expecting their first child, a fact that weighs heavily on Banning's mind as he contemplates whether the life of constant vigilance and near-death encounters that defines his career is truly compatible with the life of a father. He has been offered a promotion, a step up into a role with more oversight and less direct exposure to danger, precisely the kind of position that would allow him to be present for his family in ways his current job simply does not allow. This internal conflict, between duty to country and duty to family, is planted early and deliberately, giving Banning's character an emotional through-line that will be tested and ultimately reinforced by the events about to unfold. President Asher, for his part, is shown navigating the ordinary pressures of his office, surrounded by his trusted inner circle, including Vice President Alan Trumbull, Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan, and the ever-watchful Director of the Secret Service, Lynn Jacobs. This brief period of calm is shattered without warning by news that arrives in the middle of the night. The British Prime Minister has died suddenly, under circumstances that are initially assumed to be natural, prompting an immediate and urgent diplomatic response. Given the significance of the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, President Asher makes the decision, against some hesitation from his security team given the short notice and the logistical challenges of arranging protection on foreign soil, to travel to London personally to attend the state funeral alongside the other assembled leaders of the world's most powerful nations. The urgency of the trip means that the usual months of meticulous security planning that would typically precede a presidential visit abroad are compressed into mere days, a detail that becomes deeply significant as the story unfolds. Banning, despite his personal reservations about continuing in his current high-risk role, is naturally assigned to lead the president's protective detail for the trip, unwilling to trust anyone else with the responsibility of keeping Asher safe during what promises to be an extraordinarily high-profile and high-risk gathering. As preparations are finalized, the film introduces the audience to the sheer scale of what is about to occur in London. Nearly every major world leader is set to attend the funeral, creating an unprecedented concentration of political power within a single city for a single event, a fact that any competent security analyst would recognize as an enormous vulnerability, even under the best of circumstances. The stage is set not merely for a solemn ceremony of mourning, but for what will become one of the most audacious coordinated attacks ever depicted against a gathering of world leaders, one that has, unbeknownst to any of the assembled security services, been meticulously planned for years by a man whose grief has curdled into an unshakable thirst for retribution. Air Force One touches down in London amid tight security, and the film takes time to establish the geography and atmosphere of the city as it prepares to receive its unprecedented gathering of dignitaries. London is shown draped in the trappings of state mourning, its streets lined with security checkpoints, its skies patrolled, its historic landmarks serving as a backdrop for a ceremony meant to project unity and solemn respect among nations. Beneath this veneer of order, however, the film begins to plant the seeds of the chaos to come, showing brief glimpses of individuals moving through the city with quiet purpose, blending into the crowds of security personnel, emergency responders, and ordinary Londoners going about their lives, unaware that many of these seemingly official figures are in fact operatives working for Barkawi, embedded deep within the very security apparatus meant to protect the funeral proceedings. This infiltration is revealed gradually, allowing the audience to understand the terrifying scope of the conspiracy before the characters themselves fully grasp what is happening around them. The morning of the funeral arrives, and the procession begins with all the pomp and solemnity befitting the death of a head of state, world leaders walking together through the streets of London in a display of unity and shared grief. President Asher walks among them, flanked by Banning and the rest of his security detail, all outwardly calm despite the underlying tension of operating in unfamiliar territory. It is during this procession, amid the crowds and the ceremonial trappings of mourning, that the true nature of the day's events begins to reveal itself. Without warning, the first wave of the attack is unleashed, striking multiple locations across London simultaneously in a coordinated assault that leaves no time for any single security team to adequately respond. Explosions rip through key locations, structures collapse, and what had been a scene of solemn ceremony is instantly transformed into a scene of pure chaos and carnage. Several world leaders are killed in these initial strikes, their protective details overwhelmed or caught entirely off guard by the scale and precision of the assault. The attackers, many of them disguised as legitimate security personnel, emergency responders, or even members of the honor guard, turn on those they had been positioned to protect, revealing weapons and striking with brutal efficiency. The sequence unfolds with relentless, overwhelming momentum, jumping between different locations across the city as one landmark after another becomes the site of violence and destruction, painting a picture of an attack so vast in scope that it becomes clear this is not the work of a small, isolated cell, but rather a sprawling, deeply embedded network that has been years in the making. Amid this chaos, Banning's singular focus becomes the survival of President Asher. As the scale of the attack becomes clear, Banning makes the split-second decision to abandon the official evacuation protocols, recognizing that the compromised nature of the security apparatus means that following standard procedure could very well lead Asher directly into the hands of his enemies rather than away from them. He forces the president into a vehicle and begins a desperate flight through the increasingly chaotic streets of London, pursued by armed attackers who seem to know their movements and anticipate their attempts at escape with unsettling accuracy. This pursuit becomes one of the film's defining sequences, a relentless chase through the city that showcases Banning's combat training and battlefield instincts, as he fights off wave after wave of pursuers while simultaneously trying to keep the president alive and find a path to genuine safety. The vehicle chase eventually gives way to a foot pursuit, as Banning and Asher are forced to abandon their transportation and continue on foot through alleys, buildings, and the increasingly dangerous streets of a city that has descended into full-blown chaos. Throughout this sequence, the film emphasizes the surreal horror of watching a familiar, beloved city transformed into a war zone, with iconic structures either destroyed outright or turned into the backdrop for brutal, close-quarters combat. As Banning fights to keep Asher alive, the story cuts back to Washington, where Vice President Trumbull and the rest of the administration's senior officials scramble to understand the scope of what is happening in London and to coordinate a response from thousands of miles away. This sequence establishes the helplessness felt by those in positions of significant power who nonetheless find themselves unable to directly influence events unfolding in real time on the other side of the world. Trumbull, established in the previous film as a steady, thoughtful presence, takes charge of the crisis response, working alongside Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan and General Edward Clegg to marshal whatever military and intelligence resources can be brought to bear on the situation. Communication with Banning and Asher becomes sporadic and unreliable, adding to the mounting tension as those back home receive only fragmented updates about the survival status of their president and the man tasked with protecting him. This dual narrative structure, cutting between the visceral, immediate danger faced by Banning and Asher in London and the strategic, communications-driven crisis management occurring in Washington, allows the film to build tension on multiple fronts simultaneously, emphasizing both the personal, physical stakes of the immediate danger and the broader geopolitical consequences of an attack of this magnitude. Eventually, with the city on lockdown and enemy forces seemingly everywhere, Banning makes the decision to seek out an old contact, MI6 agent Jacqueline Jax Marshall, whom he has worked with in the past and trusts implicitly despite the extraordinary circumstances. Locating Jax's safe house becomes its own harrowing ordeal, requiring Banning to navigate streets crawling with hostile forces while keeping the increasingly shaken but resilient president moving. Upon finally reaching the safe house, the film offers a brief respite from the relentless action, allowing both the characters and the audience a moment to catch their breath and begin piecing together the true scope of what has happened. Jax, working with her own resources and connections within British intelligence, begins to uncover the truth behind the attack, tracing threads of evidence back to Amir Barkawi and confirming what had, up to this point, been only a growing suspicion among those trying to make sense of the day's events. It is during this sequence that the film reveals the full details of Barkawi's motivation, connecting the dots back to the drone strike that opened the film and revealing the deeply personal nature of the vengeance he has spent years planning. The revelation reframes the entire attack not as a random act of extremist violence, but as a calculated, deeply personal act of retribution against the very governments Barkawi holds responsible for the death of his family. The safe house also becomes the site of a chilling realization that underscores just how deeply compromised the security situation truly is. Using the safe house's communication equipment, the group manages to make contact with Trumbull back in Washington, receiving confirmation that help is being organized and dispatched to their location. When what appears to be a Delta Force rescue team arrives at the safe house, there is a brief moment of relief among the characters, a sense that the ordeal may finally be nearing its end. Banning, however, whose instincts have been honed by years of experience in high-stakes combat situations, notices a critical inconsistency. Despite the fact that these supposed rescuers are wearing heavy tactical gear appropriate for a hot, high-stress environment, none of them are sweating. This small but crucial detail leads Banning to the horrifying realization that the terrorists have somehow intercepted their communications and dispatched their own operatives disguised as the promised rescue team, meaning that the enemy has anticipated their every move and infiltrated even the most secure channels of communication available to them. This revelation forces another intense confrontation, as Banning must fight off this new wave of disguised attackers within the confines of the safe house itself. A brutal, close-quarters battle that further reinforces the sense that Barkawi's network has eyes and ears everywhere, making genuine safety feel like an increasingly distant and uncertain prospect. Having survived this latest assault, Banning, Asher, and Jax are forced once again onto the streets of London, now fully aware that they cannot trust any official channel of communication or rescue without extreme caution, given the demonstrated ability of the enemy to intercept and manipulate even supposedly secure lines of contact. This section of the film deepens the sense of paranoia and isolation that defines Banning and Asher's ordeal, as they come to understand that survival depends entirely on their own wits, skills, and the trust they place in each other and in Jax, the one ally whose loyalty has been proven beyond doubt through the events that have already transpired. The trio continues to move through the city, navigating a landscape that has been transformed by the day's violence into something unrecognizable, filled with wreckage, panicked civilians, and the ever-present threat of further ambush. Along the way, the film continues to intercut with the situation back in Washington, where Trumbull and his team work to identify and root out the source of the security breach that allowed the fake rescue team to intercept their communications. Gradually realizing the terrifying extent to which Barkawi's operation has penetrated even the highest levels of coordination between American and British security services. As the group continues their flight through London, they encounter further obstacles that test both their physical endurance and their resourcefulness. The film uses this extended middle section to deepen the relationships between its central characters, particularly the bond between Banning and Asher, which had already been established as one of profound mutual trust and respect in the first film, but is pushed to new depths here given the extremity of their shared circumstances. Stripped of the usual trappings of power and protection that would typically surround a sitting president, Asher is shown grappling with his own vulnerability and mortality in ways that humanize him considerably, while Banning's relentless determination to protect him at any cost is portrayed not merely as professional duty but as a genuine, deeply personal commitment born from years of shared experience and mutual respect. Jax, meanwhile, proves herself repeatedly throughout this stretch of the story as an invaluable and highly capable ally, her knowledge of the city and her professional skills as an intelligence operative proving essential to the group's continued survival. The dynamic between the three characters evolves from one of necessity into something resembling genuine camaraderie forged under the most extreme possible circumstances, a bond that becomes increasingly important as the stakes of their situation continue to escalate. Eventually, the group's luck runs out in a manner that dramatically escalates the stakes of the story. Despite their best efforts to remain hidden and avoid detection, Banning and Asher are eventually located and separated during a violent confrontation with Barkawi's forces, resulting in President Asher being captured and taken into custody by the terrorists. This represents the film's darkest turning point, the moment at which the mission shifts from one of evasion and survival to one of desperate rescue against overwhelming odds. Banning, having failed in his singular mission to keep Asher out of enemy hands despite everything he has sacrificed and endured throughout the preceding hours, is left to grapple with an almost unbearable sense of failure, even as he immediately begins working to determine where Asher has been taken and how he might be rescued. The film makes clear that Barkawi's ultimate goal in capturing the president is not merely to hold him for ransom or use him as a bargaining chip in any conventional sense, but rather to stage his execution as a broadcast spectacle, a final, devastating act of symbolic vengeance meant to be witnessed by the entire world, a way of inflicting on the American government the same kind of public, televised horror that Barkawi himself associates with the loss of his own family. With Asher now in the hands of Barkawi's forces, the story's focus shifts to a race against time, as Banning, working alongside Jax and drawing on whatever support Trumbull and his team back in Washington can provide, attempts to locate the site where the president is being held before the planned execution can be carried out and broadcast to a horrified global audience. This section of the film ratchets up the tension considerably, as the personal stakes established throughout the earlier portions of the story now converge with the broader geopolitical stakes of preventing what would be an unprecedented act of terrorism against the President of the United States on foreign soil. Banning's search takes him through further dangerous confrontations with Barkawi's operatives, each encounter revealing additional pieces of the puzzle regarding the location and nature of the terrorists' base of operations within the city. The film continues to alternate between these ground-level developments in London and the increasingly urgent efforts back in Washington, where Trumbull faces mounting pressure to consider drastic military options, including the possibility of a strike that could eliminate the terrorist threat but would almost certainly result in the death of President Asher along with his captors. A horrifying calculus that forces Trumbull and his advisors to confront the darkest possible outcomes of the crisis they are managing. As Banning closes in on the location where Asher is being held, the film builds toward its climactic confrontation, one that draws together all of the threads established throughout the story: Barkawi's deeply personal motivation for vengeance, Banning's unwavering commitment to protecting the president regardless of personal cost, and the broader question of whether the sprawling, deeply embedded terrorist network that has wreaked such devastation across London can finally be dismantled before it achieves its ultimate, horrifying goal. The infiltration of Barkawi's stronghold is portrayed with the same relentless intensity that has defined the film's action sequences throughout, as Banning fights his way through layer after layer of resistance, drawing on every ounce of skill and determination he possesses in what has become an intensely personal mission, not merely to save the president as a matter of professional duty, but to save a man he has come to regard as a genuine friend, someone whose survival has become inextricably linked with Banning's own sense of purpose and identity throughout the preceding ordeal. The confrontation between Banning and Barkawi's forces builds toward a final, decisive engagement in which Banning must not only overcome the remaining terrorist operatives standing between himself and the president, but also confront Barkawi directly, or at minimum dismantle the apparatus of his planned execution before it can be carried out. This climactic sequence draws on the full weight of everything the film has built throughout its runtime: the personal stakes of Banning and Asher's relationship, the broader geopolitical stakes of preventing a devastating act of terrorism against the highest office of the United States government, and the deeply human tragedy underlying Barkawi's own motivations, a man whose grief and rage, however understandable in origin, have led him to orchestrate an act of violence on a scale that dwarfs even the tragedy that set him on this path in the first place. The film does not shy away from portraying this final confrontation with the same brutal, visceral intensity that has characterized its action throughout, emphasizing the physical and emotional toll that the day's events have taken on Banning as he pushes himself to his absolute limits in pursuit of Asher's rescue. In the end, Banning succeeds in reaching President Asher before the planned execution can be carried out, engaging in a final, desperate struggle to free him from captivity and neutralize the remaining threats surrounding them. This rescue is portrayed not as an easy or triumphant moment, but as a hard-won victory purchased at enormous cost, both in terms of the human lives lost throughout the preceding hours of chaos and destruction across London, and in terms of the physical and emotional toll exacted on Banning himself throughout his relentless efforts to keep his president alive. The resolution of the immediate crisis, Asher's rescue and the neutralization of the most immediate terrorist threats surrounding him, gives way to a broader reckoning with the scale of what has occurred, as the film shifts its focus toward the aftermath of the attack and the process of accounting for the devastating human and political cost of the day's events. Barkawi's broader network, while dealt a significant blow through the events depicted in the film, is portrayed as extending beyond what any single confrontation could fully dismantle, leaving open questions about the long-term consequences of the attack and the ongoing threat posed by the ideological and personal grievances that fueled it in the first place. Throughout this climactic final stretch, the film continues to weave in the perspective of those back in Washington, portraying the immense relief felt by Trumbull and the rest of the administration upon receiving confirmation that President Asher has survived the ordeal, tempered by the sobering awareness of just how close the situation came to an entirely different, catastrophic outcome. The film's resolution emphasizes not triumphant celebration, but rather a somber, hard-earned sense of relief, acknowledging the tremendous loss of life and the profound disruption inflicted upon London throughout the course of the attack, even as it affirms the survival of its central characters and the ultimate success of Banning's singular, relentless mission to protect the man he has sworn to defend. In its final moments, the film returns to the personal, human stakes that have run throughout its narrative, bringing Banning back into contact with his family, a quiet, understated reunion that stands in stark contrast to the relentless violence and chaos that has defined the preceding hours of the story. This closing note reinforces the film's underlying emotional through-line, the tension between Banning's professional duty and his personal desire for a life beyond constant danger, suggesting that even amid the extraordinary, world-altering events he has just survived, what ultimately matters most to him is the prospect of returning home to the people he loves. President Asher, having survived an ordeal that has tested him in ways he could scarcely have imagined, is left forever changed by his first-hand experience of the violence and vulnerability that Banning has spent his career protecting him from, a transformation that adds a layer of depth to his character heading into whatever challenges the future may hold for both men and the offices they represent. London Has Fallen ultimately tells a story of survival against overwhelming odds, exploring the devastating consequences of a cycle of violence that spans continents and years, born from a single act of military intervention that set in motion a chain of retribution culminating in an assault on one of the world's most storied cities. It is a story that foregrounds the bond between two men, a president and the agent sworn to protect him, testing that bond against the most extreme circumstances imaginable and ultimately affirming it as a source of strength capable of overcoming even the most meticulously planned and devastating acts of terrorism. Through its relentless pacing, its willingness to place its characters in situation after situation of seemingly inescapable danger, and its exploration of the deeply personal motivations underlying even the most large-scale acts of political violence, the film delivers a story that is at once a pure, high-octane action spectacle and a meditation on the human costs of a world defined by cycles of violence and retribution that all too often claim innocent lives on both sides of any given conflict. Gerard Butler. Gerard James Butler was born on November 13, 1969, in Paisley, Renfrewshire, Scotland, the youngest of three children born to Margaret and Edward Butler, a bookmaker, in a Catholic family of Irish descent. When Butler was just 6 months old, his family relocated to Montreal, Quebec, in Canada, but the move proved short-lived, as his parents' marriage broke down roughly a year later. His mother made the decision to return to Scotland with her children, and Butler was subsequently raised primarily in Paisley without any contact from his father for well over a decade. He would not see his father again until he was 16 years old, when the elder Butler reached out and arranged to meet him at a restaurant in Glasgow, an emotional reunion that Butler has described as unleashing a flood of pain and sorrow he had not realized he was carrying. The two went on to rebuild a close relationship in the years that followed, one that lasted until Butler's father passed away from cancer when Butler was in his early 20s. As a young student, Butler attended St. Mirren's and St. Margaret's High School in Paisley, where he distinguished himself academically and was ultimately named head boy, all while nurturing a growing passion for performance through his involvement with the Scottish Youth Theatre, where one of his earliest roles saw him play a street urchin in a production of Oliver. Despite this creative pull, Butler pursued a more conventional path after graduating, winning a place at the University of Glasgow's School of Law, driven in part by a sense of practicality and a desire to please his family, since acting seemed like an unrealistic dream for a boy from Scotland with no clear path into an industry dominated by actors from elsewhere. He would later reflect that Scottish actors rarely found real opportunities in the film industry at that time, with Sean Connery standing as something of a lone exception. Butler spent years studying law, including a stint in California, and was ultimately positioned to qualify as a solicitor, having even served as president of his university's law society thanks to his outgoing, sociable personality. However, in a moment that would alter the entire course of his life, Butler was fired from the law firm where he worked just 1 week before he was due to officially qualify, a professional collapse that arrived alongside significant personal struggles, including difficulties with alcohol that would continue to affect him at various points throughout his adult life. Rather than retreating from this setback, Butler made the bold decision to move to London the very next day, determined to finally pursue the acting career he had long suppressed. He supported himself with a series of odd jobs while chasing auditions, and his breakthrough came unexpectedly when, while working as a casting assistant for a stage production of Coriolanus, he happened to encounter the play's director, Stephen Burkoff, in a London coffee shop. Butler pleaded for the chance to audition, delivered what he has since described as an all-or-nothing performance, and won the lead role, a moment he has called one of the happiest of his life. From this stage debut, Butler's film career began to take shape gradually through the mid to late 1990s, with small roles in the historical drama Mrs. Brown, the James Bond film Tomorrow Never Dies, and Tale of the Mummy. His fortunes changed significantly at the turn of the millennium, when he landed starring roles as Count Dracula in Dracula 2000 and as the title character in the television miniseries Attila, both of which helped establish him as a leading man capable of carrying intense, physically demanding roles. Throughout the early 2000s, Butler continued building his filmography with roles in Reign of Fire, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life alongside Angelina Jolie, and Timeline, before landing the role of Eric, the Phantom, in Joel Schumacher's 2004 film adaptation of The Phantom of the Opera, a part that showcased both his dramatic range and his singing ability. It was in 2006, however, that Butler achieved true international stardom, playing the Spartan King Leonidas in Zack Snyder's visually stylized war epic 300, a role that required him to undergo an intensely demanding 4-month training regimen to achieve the physicality necessary for the part. The film became a massive box office success and transformed Butler into one of the most recognizable leading men in Hollywood, opening the door to a wide variety of roles across genres, including romantic comedies such as P.S. I Love You and The Ugly Truth, family adventure films like Nim's Island, and voice acting work in the How to Train Your Dragon franchise beginning in 2010. In 2013, Butler took on the role that would define much of the next decade of his career, playing Secret Service agent Mike Banning in Olympus Has Fallen, a role he reprised in London Has Fallen and later in Angel Has Fallen, cementing his status as one of the action genre's most reliable leading men. Alongside his acting work, Butler has also been active as a film producer, and he has spoken candidly in interviews about his ongoing recovery from alcohol dependency, noting that he has largely avoided drinking since 2011 following a period of treatment. He divides his time between Los Angeles and Glasgow and has continued to work steadily across the action genre in the years since London Has Fallen, remaining one of the most bankable and hardworking stars associated with large-scale international thrillers. Aaron Eckhart. Aaron Edward Eckhart was born on March 12, 1968, in Cupertino, California, to James Conrad Eckhart, a computer industry executive, and Mary Martha Eckhart, a children's book author and poet. He is the youngest of 3 sons and was raised for a time within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, an upbringing that took him far beyond California, as his father's career relocated the family first to England and later to Australia during his teenage years. Eckhart has spoken about the somewhat nomadic nature of his upbringing, recalling how his father once informed the family they would be moving to England with little warning, and how this period of his life allowed him to travel extensively throughout Europe, skiing, playing soccer in Paris, and experiencing rugby in Munich. He attended the American Community School while living in England before the family relocated again to Sydney, Australia, where he completed his final year of high school at the American International School of Sydney, though he ultimately left without formally graduating. Rather than following a traditional academic path immediately afterward, Eckhart spent a period of several years living in Hawaii, where he pursued surfing and other outdoor pursuits before deciding to pursue higher education. He eventually earned a high school equivalency certificate, which allowed him to enroll at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah, where he graduated in 1994 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in film. It was during his time as an undergraduate at Brigham Young that Eckhart formed one of the most consequential relationships of his early career, meeting director and writer Neil LaBute, who would go on to cast him in several of his original stage productions. Following graduation, Eckhart spent much of the mid-1990s living in New York City as a struggling and largely unemployed actor, working to establish himself in a notoriously difficult industry. His breakthrough finally arrived in 1997, when he starred in LaBute's dark comedy film In the Company of Men, playing an unctuous and sociopathic womanizer whose cruelty toward women drives the film's uncomfortable narrative, a performance that immediately drew critical attention and established Eckhart as a bold, unconventional talent willing to take on morally complicated characters. He continued his collaboration with LaBute across several further projects, including Your Friends and Neighbors, in which he played an entirely different sort of character, before achieving wider mainstream recognition for his supporting role as George, a motorcycle-riding love interest, in Steven Soderbergh's Erin Brockovich in 2000, a film that also won Julia Roberts an Academy Award. Throughout the early 2000s, Eckhart continued building a diverse filmography, appearing in projects such as Nurse Betty, The Pledge under the direction of Sean Penn, Possession, and several thrillers released in 2003, including The Core, The Missing, and Paycheck. In 2006, he earned a Golden Globe nomination for his performance as tobacco industry lobbyist Nick Naylor in the satirical comedy Thank You for Smoking, a role that further demonstrated his ability to bring nuance and unexpected charm to morally ambiguous characters. That same productive period also saw him appear in The Black Dahlia under director Brian De Palma. Eckhart's career reached a new level of global prominence in 2008 when he was cast as District Attorney Harvey Dent, who transforms over the course of the film into the villainous Two-Face, in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, one of the most successful and influential superhero films ever made, a role that introduced him to an enormous global audience. He continued to take on emotionally demanding work in the years that followed, including an acclaimed performance opposite Nicole Kidman, who personally selected him for the role, in the grief-focused drama Rabbit Hole in 2010, as well as a leading role as a Marine Staff Sergeant in the science fiction war film Battle, Los Angeles in 2011. In 2013, Eckhart joined the Has Fallen franchise as President Benjamin Asher in Olympus Has Fallen, a role he would reprise in London Has Fallen in 2016, bringing a grounded, human vulnerability to the portrayal of a sitting American president thrust into extraordinary danger. Throughout his career, Eckhart has maintained a reputation for selecting roles based on artistic interest rather than simply chasing fame, and despite his high-profile parts, he has kept a relatively low public profile, describing himself in interviews as a lapsed member of the Latter-day Saint faith while still expressing appreciation for the values instilled in him during his upbringing. Morgan Freeman. Morgan Freeman was born on June 1, 1937, in Memphis, Tennessee, to Mamie Edna Freeman, a schoolteacher, and Morgan Porterfield Freeman, a barber who struggled with alcoholism and passed away in 1961. Freeman was the youngest of 5 children, and his early years were shaped by the pressures of the Jim Crow South and the broader currents of the Great Migration, as his parents relocated to Chicago in search of better economic opportunities while young Morgan remained for a period in the care of his maternal grandmother in Charleston, Mississippi. Following his grandmother's death when he was around 6 years old, Freeman moved north to live with his mother, who had by then separated from his father, and he spent much of his subsequent childhood moving between Mississippi and Illinois. It was in elementary school that Freeman first discovered his talent for performance, reportedly excelling almost immediately when given the opportunity to act on stage at around the age of 12. Despite this early spark, Freeman's childhood ambition was not to become an actor but rather a fighter pilot, and upon graduating high school in 1955, he turned down a partial drama scholarship in favor of enlisting in the United States Air Force. His time in the military did not match his expectations, however, as he found himself assigned to ground-based work as a mechanic and radar technician rather than the aviation career he had envisioned, and he ultimately came to feel that the military life was not a genuine calling for him. Freeman left the Air Force in 1959 and relocated to Los Angeles to pursue acting in earnest, attending Los Angeles City College and taking acting classes while struggling considerably to find consistent work. In the early 1960s, he moved once again, this time to New York City, where he continued auditioning at night while taking on a series of low-paying day jobs to support himself. His perseverance paid off in 1967, the same year he married his first wife, Jeanette Adair Bradshaw, when he landed a role in an all-black Broadway production of Hello, Dolly, marking his formal professional debut on the New York stage. Freeman continued building a substantial career in theater throughout the 1970s, winning both a Drama Desk Award and a Clarence Derwent Award, along with a Tony Award nomination for his performance in The Mighty Gents in 1978. During this same period, he became widely known to television audiences through his recurring role as Easy Reader on the educational children's program The Electric Company, which aired from 1971 to 1976. His stage career reached further heights in 1980, when he won 2 Obie Awards in a single year, one for his acclaimed portrayal of the Shakespearean anti-hero Coriolanus and another for his performance in Mother Courage and Her Children. Freeman's transition into more substantial film work began to accelerate through the 1980s, with his performance in the crime drama Street Smart in 1987 earning him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, a breakthrough that finally established him as a significant film actor after decades of dedicated stage and television work. The years that followed brought an extraordinary run of acclaimed performances, including Glory in 1989, as well as Driving Miss Daisy and Lean on Me that same year, the former of which earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s, Freeman became one of the most consistently respected actors in American cinema, appearing in The Shawshank Redemption, Say 7 and Amistad, and eventually winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his performance in $1 Million Baby in 2004. He further built his legacy through roles in Batman Begins and its sequels as Lucius Fox, as well as his portrayal of Nelson Mandela in Invictus, a performance that earned him further award recognition. Alongside his acting, Freeman became known for his distinctive, authoritative narrating voice, lending it to major documentaries such as March of the Penguins and numerous other film and television projects over the decades. In 1996, he co-founded the production company Revelations Entertainment with his business partner Laurie McCreary, further expanding his influence behind the camera. Freeman joined the Has Fallen franchise as vice president and later President Alan Trumbull, beginning with Olympus Has Fallen in 2013 and continuing through London Has Fallen in 2016 and Angel Has Fallen in 2019. Adding another significant recurring role to a career already defined by decades of memorable and dignified performances across nearly every genre of American filmmaking. Angela Bassett. Angela Evelyn Bassett was born on August 16, 1958, in New York City, to Betty Jane Bassett, a social worker, and Daniel Benjamin Bassett. Her parents separated when she was young, and Bassett, along with her sister Danette, was subsequently raised by her single mother in St. Petersburg, Florida, where the family lived in a housing project and where her mother placed enormous emphasis on the importance of education for her daughters. Bassett attended local schools in St. Petersburg, and while in high school, a pivotal moment occurred during a class trip to Washington, D.C., when she attended a Kennedy Center production of Mice and Men starring James Earl Jones. The experience moved her so profoundly that she resolved then and there to pursue acting as a career, and she began taking part in school and church productions to develop her craft. Encouraged by a supportive teacher, Bassett applied to Yale University and was accepted on an academic scholarship, ultimately spending 7 years at the institution, during which she earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies in 1980 and went on to complete a Master of Fine Arts degree at the Yale School of Drama in 1983. It was during her time at Yale that Bassett studied under the celebrated stage director Lloyd Richards, who cast her in Broadway productions of 2 plays by August Wilson, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Joe Turner's Come and Gone, giving her substantial early exposure to some of the most significant dramatic writing of the era. It was also at Yale that she met her future husband, fellow actor Courtney B. Vance, though the two would not begin a romantic relationship until years later, after both of their careers had progressed. Bassett spent the mid-1980s working a series of supporting jobs, including as a photo researcher and receptionist at a beauty salon, while continuing to pursue stage and television opportunities, including small television roles on programs such as The Cosby Show and Spencer, for Hire. She made her film debut in 1986 with a small role in the film F/X, and relocated to Los Angeles in 1988 to more fully pursue a film career. Her breakthrough arrived in 1991 with a role in John Singleton's acclaimed drama Boys in the Hood, which helped launch the careers of numerous young black actors of the era, and she followed this with a widely praised performance as Betty Shabazz, the wife of Malcolm X, in Spike Lee's 1992 biographical epic Malcolm X. The following year, Bassett achieved her most significant early success, winning the role of Tina Turner in the biographical film What's Love Got to Do with It, a performance that required her to prepare extensively despite never having seen Turner perform live, and which ultimately earned her both an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and a Golden Globe Award for Best Actress, making her the first African American performer to win that particular Golden Globe category. Bassett continued building a substantial filmography throughout the mid to late 1990s, including Waiting to Exhale alongside Whitney Houston in 1995 and How Stella Got Her Groove Back in 1998, both adaptations of novels by author Terry McMillan, as well as a supporting role as a presidential advisor in Robert Zemeckis' Contact in 1997. Bassett married Courtney B. Vance in October 1997, and the couple welcomed twins, a son named Slater and a daughter named Bronwyn, via surrogate in 2006. Throughout the 2000s, Bassett continued to diversify her work across film and television, taking on roles in The Rosa Parks Story, Akeelah and the Bee, and Notorious, in which she portrayed the mother of the rapper Christopher Wallace, alongside recurring television work on programs such as Alias and ER, the latter of which she shared with her husband. In 2013, the same year, she joined the Has Fallen franchise as Secret Service Director Lynn Jacobs in Olympus Has Fallen, a role she reprised in London Has Fallen in 2016. Bassett also began a notable run on the FX horror anthology series American Horror Story, appearing across multiple seasons in a variety of striking roles that further demonstrated her range. Her career reached new heights of mainstream global recognition beginning in 2018, when she was cast as Queen Ramonda in Marvel's Black Panther, a role she reprised in Avengers, Endgame, and most significantly, in Black Panther: Wakanda Forever in 2022, a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, making her the first performer ever nominated for an Oscar for a role in a Marvel Studios film, alongside a Golden Globe Award win for the same performance. In recognition of her decades-long body of work, Bassett was presented with an Academy Honorary Award at the Governor's Awards in January 2024, cementing her status as one of the most respected and accomplished actresses of her generation. Charlotte Riley. Charlotte Frances Riley was born on December 29, 1981, in the village of Grindon in County Durham, in the north of England, the youngest of 3 children born to an engineer father and a nurse mother who also worked as a bereavement counselor. She grew up in the quiet, hilly countryside of County Durham, attending Teesside High School from the age of 9 until 18, where she began to develop a strong interest in theatre and literature. Riley went on to study at St. Cuthbert's Society, part of Durham University, between 2000 and 2003, earning a degree in English and linguistics while also becoming actively involved in the university's creative and performing arts scene, including participation in the sketch comedy group known as the Durham Review as well as various stage plays and musical productions. In 2004, while still building her early creative credentials, Riley won the Sunday Times Playwriting Award for a piece titled Shaking Cecilia, which she co-wrote with a collaborator named Tiffany Wood, and which was performed at the Edinburgh Festival. Seeking further formal training as a performer, Riley subsequently attended the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art between 2005 and 2007, refining her craft ahead of a professional acting career. Her breakthrough into film came in 2008, when she was cast as Sarah Hurst in Easy Virtue, a comedy adaptation of a Noel Coward play directed by Stephen Elliott. It was her role the following year, however, that truly established her reputation, when she was cast as Catherine Earnshaw, the passionate and tragic heroine of ITV's television adaptation of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. It was on the set of this production that Riley first met actor Tom Hardy, who played opposite her as Heathcliff, and the two developed a close friendship that would eventually blossom into a romantic relationship several years later, following further collaboration on the television series The Take in 2009. The couple became engaged around the summer of 2010 and were ultimately married on July 4, 2014, in an intimate ceremony at the Château de Roussen in France, and they went on to have 2 sons together, born in October 2015 and December 2018 respectively, while Riley also became a stepmother to Hardy's older son from a previous relationship. Professionally, Riley continued to build a diverse body of work throughout the 2010s, appearing in the historical miniseries World Without End in 2012, for which she earned a Saturn Award nomination for Best Actress on Television, and later starring opposite Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt in the science fiction action film Edge of Tomorrow in 2014, a production for which she underwent physical training to perform many of her own stunts. That same period saw her join the cast of the acclaimed BBC crime drama Peaky Blinders, playing the recurring character May Carlton across several seasons, further raising her profile among British television audiences. In 2015, Riley took on the role of MI6 agent Jacqueline Marshall in London Has Fallen, marking one of her more prominent forays into major international action filmmaking. And that same year she also appeared in Ron Howard's historical seafaring drama In the Heart of the Sea. She continued expanding her range into the later part of the decade and beyond, taking on leading roles in the BBC Drama Press in 2018 and portraying a reimagined version of the Ghost of Christmas Present in a BBC adaptation of A Christmas Carol in 2019, before moving into science fiction television with a starring role in Amazon's The Peripheral in 2022. Throughout her career, Riley has maintained a reputation for guarding her personal life carefully, particularly regarding her family with Hardy, while continuing to build a body of work that spans period drama, science fiction, and major studio action filmmaking. Robert Forster, Melissa Leo, Jackie Earle Haley, and Radha Mitchell. The remainder of the London Has Fallen ensemble was built from a group of accomplished and highly experienced performers, each of whom brought decades of established screen work to their supporting roles in the film. Robert Forster, who portrayed General Edward Clegg, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was a veteran American actor whose career stretched back to the late 1960s, having first come to prominence through his early film work before experiencing a significant career resurgence in the late 1990s following his acclaimed performance in Quentin Tarantino's Jackie Brown, a role that earned him an Academy Award nomination and reintroduced him to a new generation of filmgoers as a dependable, world-weary screen presence. Forster went on to become a familiar face in numerous film and television projects over the following 2 decades, valued for the quiet gravity and authenticity he brought to authority figures and grounded, working-class characters alike, qualities that made him a natural fit for the role of a senior American military official in the Has Fallen franchise, which he first joined in Olympus Has Fallen before reprising the role in London Has Fallen. Melissa Leo, who played Secretary of Defense Ruth McMillan, is an accomplished American actress whose career has been defined by a willingness to take on complex, often morally difficult characters across both independent and mainstream film. Leo rose to widespread critical prominence in the years leading up to her work on the Has Fallen franchise, most notably winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for her performance as a determined boxing trainer and mother in The Fighter in 2010, a role that showcased the raw intensity and commitment that has become a hallmark of her acting style. Her involvement in the franchise, beginning with Olympus Has Fallen and continuing into London Has Fallen, added a further layer of institutional gravity to the film's depiction of the American government's crisis response. Jackie Earle Haley, who portrayed Deputy Chief Mason, brought a particularly unusual career arc to the production, having first achieved fame as a child actor in the 1970s before largely stepping away from the industry for a period of years. Haley staged a widely celebrated comeback in the mid-2000s, earning an Academy Award nomination for his unsettling and deeply committed performance in Little Children in 2006, a resurgence that re-established him as a respected character actor capable of bringing intensity and nuance to a wide range of roles, including his memorable turn as Rorschach in the 2009 film adaptation of Watchmen. His casting in London Has Fallen, following his introduction to the franchise in the same film, reflected his continued demand as a reliable supporting performer in major studio productions throughout the 2010s. Radha Mitchell, who played Mike Banning's wife Leah, is an Australian actress who built a substantial international career beginning in the late 1990s and early 2000s, appearing in a wide range of films that showcased her versatility across drama, horror, and science fiction. Mitchell became particularly well known for her work in films such as Pitch Black and Melinda, establishing herself as a dependable leading and supporting performer capable of anchoring both large studio productions and smaller independent projects. Her role as Leah Banning across both Olympus Has Fallen and London Has Fallen provided an important emotional and domestic counterpoint to the high-stakes political action driving the main narrative, grounding Mike Banning's character in a recognizable, relatable family life even as the world around him descended into chaos. Together, this ensemble of performers, ranging from major Hollywood leading men and women to a deep bench of accomplished character actors, gave London Has Fallen the dramatic weight and credibility necessary to sell its high-stakes, globe-spanning premise, drawing on decades of combined experience across stage, television, and film to bring both the film's heroes and its supporting government officials fully to life. The budget, production journey, and behind-the-scenes atmosphere of London Has Fallen tell a story that is in many ways just as eventful as the film itself, marked by a troubled path to production, a significant international shoot, and a set that, despite the intensity of its subject matter, was reportedly filled with camaraderie, laughter, and playful energy among a cast that had already bonded during the making of the original film. London Has Fallen was produced on a total budget of approximately $60 million, a figure that actually represented a reduction from the $70 million budget of its predecessor, Olympus Has Fallen, despite the fact that the sequel was tasked with delivering a significantly larger scope of destruction and action across an entire city rather than a single confined building. This decision to work with a comparatively modest budget, particularly by the standards of large-scale international action blockbusters, reflects a broader trend among mid-budget franchise films of the era, where producers sought to maximize on-screen spectacle while keeping costs contained enough to guarantee profitability even without blockbuster-level ticket sales. The financial gamble ultimately paid off handsomely for the studio, as London Has Fallen went on to gross approximately $62.7 million domestically within North America and a further $143.2 million in international markets, for a combined worldwide total of roughly $205.8 million, comfortably outperforming its already successful predecessor's worldwide total of around $170 million. This meant that on a percentage basis, London Has Fallen delivered an even stronger return on investment than Olympus Has Fallen had managed, despite launching into a considerably more competitive box office landscape and facing a much harsher critical reception. This financial success ultimately proved essential in convincing the studio to greenlight a third installment in the franchise, Angel Has Fallen, which arrived in theaters several years later. The path to actually getting London Has Fallen made, however, was considerably more turbulent than its eventual box office performance might suggest. Following the surprise success of Olympus Has Fallen in 2013, a sequel was fast-tracked into development, with the studio eager to capitalize on the goodwill and box office momentum generated by the first film. The original plan called for production to begin as early as May 2014 in London, with screenwriters Creighton Rothenberger and Katrin Benedict returning to pen the script, given their familiarity with the world and characters established in the first installment. However, one of the first major complications arose when Antoine Fuqua, who had directed the original film to strong reviews for its tense, controlled direction, declined to return for the sequel due to prior commitments directing The Equalizer, a decision that left the production without its creative anchor at a fairly early stage. The search for a replacement director led the studio to Frederick Bond, a filmmaker known for the drama Charlie Countryman, who was announced as the new director in August 2014. This arrangement, however, proved to be short-lived in dramatic fashion, as Bond departed the project just 6 weeks before principal photography was scheduled to begin, leaving the production in a state of considerable uncertainty with a start date rapidly approaching and no director in place to guide it. It was only after this scramble that Babak Najafi, whose prior work had largely been within Scandinavian cinema, was brought on board just weeks before cameras were set to roll, tasked with stepping into an already assembled production with a script, cast, and shooting schedule largely locked into place. This last-minute directorial change meant that Najafi effectively inherited a project already in motion, requiring him to quickly assert his own creative vision while working within constraints that had already been established by his predecessors. A challenging position for any filmmaker, but one that Najafi ultimately navigated well enough to deliver a film that significantly outperformed its budget expectations. Beyond the behind-the-scenes drama of the directorial search, the production also had to contend with an unusually sensitive scheduling consideration tied to real-world events. The film had originally been slated for an October 2015 release, but the date was ultimately pushed back, in part due to concerns that an earlier release or an early marketing push coinciding with the 10th anniversary of the July 7, 2005 London bombings would be seen as insensitive or exploitative given the film's own subject matter involving a large-scale terrorist attack on London. This kind of scheduling sensitivity reflects the broader challenges that action filmmakers face when depicting fictionalized violence against real cities with genuine, painful histories of terrorism, a tension that would later resurface in critical commentary following the film's eventual release, with some reviewers and commentators noting the uncomfortable resonance between the film's fictional carnage and the real trauma experienced by London during actual terrorist attacks. Once production finally got underway, principal photography began on October 24, 2014, in London itself, marking the start of what would become an extensive and geographically varied shoot. The first phase of filming involved roughly 4 weeks of work centered on actors Morgan Freeman, Aaron Eckhart, Angela Bassett, and Melissa Leo, establishing many of the film's Washington-based sequences before the production broke for the Christmas holiday season. Gerard Butler, notably, joined the production somewhat later than his co-stars, a scheduling arrangement necessitated by the fact that he had been filming the disaster film Geostorm in the months prior, meaning that his scenes alongside Aaron Eckhart were not filmed until March 2015, well after production had resumed following the winter break. This staggered filming schedule, while common in the industry for productions juggling the availability of in-demand stars, meant that the London Has Fallen shoot stretched across a considerably longer calendar period than a more tightly compressed schedule might have required, ultimately continuing all the way through April 2015. Filming locations included a number of genuinely significant sites around London, most notably Somerset House, the grand neoclassical building along the Thames that is more commonly associated with hosting London Fashion Week and outdoor summer film screenings. During production, a helicopter was filmed making a striking landing directly within the courtyard of Somerset House, a sequence that required careful coordination with the site's management given the historic and architecturally sensitive nature of the location. Beyond Somerset House, the production also made extensive use of the legendary Pinewood Studios, one of the most storied filmmaking facilities in the world, whose soundstages allowed the production team to construct and control interior environments that would have been impractical or impossible to film on genuine location given the scale of destruction the story called for. Interestingly, the production's geographic footprint extended well beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. Gerard Butler confirmed in interviews conducted during production that portions of the film were also shot in India, adding an additional international dimension to a shoot that was already juggling multiple countries and logistical challenges. The production's most significant international detour, however, came in Bulgaria, where substantial portions of the film were shot at what was then known as the Boyana Cinema Center, now more commonly referred to as Boyana Film Studios, located just outside Sofia. Bulgaria has long served as a popular filming destination for major international productions seeking to replicate the visual scale of larger, more expensive cities while working within more cost-effective production environments, and London Has Fallen made extensive use of these advantages, using Bulgarian locations and studio facilities to stand in for portions of the devastated London cityscape depicted throughout the film's second half. The scale and prestige of the production drew notable attention within Bulgaria itself, with then-President of Bulgaria, Rosen Plevneliev, personally visiting the set during filming at Boyana, a visit that underscored the significant economic and cultural impact that major international film productions can have on host countries, particularly one like Bulgaria that has actively worked to position itself as an attractive destination for foreign film investment. During his visit, Plevneliev reportedly commented on the potential for Bulgaria's film industry to grow significantly given the country's capacity to host large-scale international productions, reflecting the mutually beneficial relationship between Hollywood productions seeking cost savings and countries like Bulgaria seeking to build up their domestic film infrastructure and international reputation as a filming hub. Beyond the visual effects and location work, the film's musical identity was also carefully constructed during this period, with composer Trevor Morris returning to the franchise after having scored Olympus Has Fallen. Morris, known for his work on television projects such as The Tudors and The Borgias, brought a similarly grand, orchestral sensibility to London Has Fallen's score, which was ultimately recorded at the legendary Abbey Road Studios in London with the Chamber Orchestra of London performing the material, lending the finished film's musical backdrop a level of prestige and polish that stood in contrast to some of the more critically maligned elements of the script and narrative. Turning to the atmosphere on set itself, numerous interviews conducted with the cast throughout the production and promotional period paint a picture of a genuinely warm, familiar working environment, particularly among the returning cast members who had already built strong relationships during the making of Olympus Has Fallen 3 years earlier. Gerard Butler spoke openly in multiple interviews about the sense of camaraderie that defined the production, describing the returning ensemble as functioning almost like a fraternity, noting that the friendships forged during the first film had carried through into the sequel and allowed the cast to slip back into their roles and their working relationships with remarkable ease. Butler specifically highlighted how comfortable and natural it felt to reunite with his castmates, suggesting that this pre-existing chemistry translated into a noticeably relaxed and enjoyable atmosphere on set, even amid the physically demanding and logistically complex nature of the shoot. In joint interviews conducted alongside Angela Bassett during the film's promotional tour, the two actors were noted as sharing genuine laughter while discussing the film's many one-liners and quips, an indication that much of the dry, sardonic humor that made it into Mike Banning's dialogue throughout the finished film reflected a similarly playful energy that existed between the actors delivering those lines during production. This lighter, more comedic dimension of the shoot stands in interesting contrast to the film's often brutal and violent subject matter, suggesting that the cast found ways to inject levity into a production that, by its very nature, required them to spend long hours simulating scenes of citywide terrorist destruction and violence. One particularly memorable piece of behind-the-scenes material to emerge from the production involved a deleted scene that Gerard Butler personally shared during a television appearance on The Late Late Show, hosted by fellow Briton James Corden, shortly after the film's release. The deleted sequence, which ultimately did not make it into the finished film, involved a fast-talking Cockney fruit seller whose rapid-fire, rhyming patter inadvertently slows down a high-speed police pursuit taking place on the streets of London. This kind of scene, blending broad, almost slapstick comedic timing with the film's otherwise relentless action sequences, offers a glimpse into a slightly different tonal register that the filmmakers experimented with during production, one that leaned more heavily into a distinctly British, almost pantomime style of humor before ultimately being cut in favor of maintaining the film's more consistently tense pacing. Butler's decision to share this clip publicly, and the genuine amusement with which he discussed it during the interview, reflects the good humor with which the cast and crew appear to have approached even the more absurd or over-the-top elements of the production, willing to poke fun at the film's own genre conventions even while fully committing to them in the finished product. The dialogue that did make it into the finished film also reflects this same blend of hardened action sensibility and dry, sardonic wit that seemed to permeate much of the production. Mike Banning's now well-known lines throughout the film, delivered with Butler's characteristic gruff charm, became something of a hallmark of the character's appeal, ranging from blunt battlefield pragmatism to moments of genuinely comedic understatement amid chaos. Exchanges between Banning and President Asher, particularly a memorable moment involving a jog during which Asher questions what Banning is made of, only for Banning to reply with a wry reference to bourbon and poor choices while running backward, exemplify the kind of loose, improvisational feeling banter that Butler and Eckhart developed between their characters over the course of 2 films together. Similarly, Morgan Freeman's Vice President Trumbull was given a number of dry, understated moments of his own, including a notably absurd digression about the particular joy of catching a 70-pound king mackerel off the coast of Jekyll Island, A brief aside that stands as one of the more unexpectedly whimsical character beats in an otherwise relentlessly serious political thriller. These kinds of small character touches suggest a collaborative give and take between the actors and the material, with performers like Freeman and Butler bringing their own comedic instincts to bear on dialogue that might have otherwise felt flat or purely functional on the page. Not every aspect of the production ran entirely smoothly from a logistical standpoint, and some of the more unusual behind-the-scenes trivia to emerge from the film speaks to the complicated puzzle of coordinating a large ensemble cast across a lengthy, multi-location shoot. Due to scheduling conflicts between Morgan Freeman and Gerard Butler during the production period, the two actors reportedly did not appear together in person for at least one key scene involving both of their characters, with the production instead relying on body doubles and careful camera angles that avoided showing faces directly in order to create the illusion of a shared scene despite the two stars never actually being on set together at the same time for that particular sequence. This kind of logistical workaround is a relatively common, if rarely publicized, practice in large ensemble productions where the demands of scheduling multiple in-demand stars across a compressed shooting window can make it genuinely difficult to have every actor physically present for every scene involving their characters, requiring resourceful solutions from directors, editors, and visual effects teams to maintain narrative continuity without the audience ever noticing the workaround. The physical demands placed on Gerard Butler throughout the production were also a frequent topic of discussion in interviews conducted both during and after filming. Butler has spoken candidly about the intense physical preparation required to convincingly portray Mike Banning's near-superhuman combat capabilities, noting that he insisted on performing as many of his own stunts as production safety guidelines would allow, though he has also acknowledged that certain sequences were simply too dangerous even for his own considerable commitment to physical authenticity. He has described the months of dedicated training required to prepare his body for the demands of the role, joking in interviews about the discipline required to give up less healthy indulgences like junk food in favor of a rigorous training and dietary regimen necessary to maintain the physique and stamina the role demanded. Butler has suggested that this cycle of intense physical preparation followed by periods of relaxation between projects has become a defining rhythm of his career as an action star, one that he has grown accustomed to but that nonetheless requires real sacrifice and discipline each time he takes on a physically demanding role of this kind. The scale of the production's ambition also created its own unique behind-the-scenes challenges, particularly given the film's determination to destroy or damage a wide array of recognizable London landmarks throughout its runtime. Achieving this level of city-wide devastation required extensive coordination between the film's practical effects teams, working on constructed sets and location shoots, and its visual effects artists, who were tasked with digitally enhancing and, in many cases, entirely recreating portions of London's skyline and streetscape to convincingly sell the illusion of a city under coordinated terrorist assault. This blend of practical and digital effects work, common in modern blockbuster filmmaking, required careful planning to ensure that physical stunts, explosions, and combat choreography filmed on set or on location could be seamlessly integrated with the digital destruction added in post-production. A process that added significant time and complexity to the film's overall post-production schedule even after principal photography had wrapped in the spring of 2015. Despite the film's ultimately mixed to negative critical reception upon release, with many reviewers taking specific issue with elements of the film's script and its handling of certain sensitive political and cultural themes, the affection expressed by the cast for one another and for the experience of making the film appears to have remained a consistent thread throughout the promotional cycle surrounding its release. Interviews conducted around the film's premiere frequently return to this theme of genuine camaraderie, with cast members repeatedly emphasizing how much they enjoyed the opportunity to work together again, suggesting that regardless of how critics ultimately received the finished film, the experience of making it was, by most accounts, a genuinely positive and often light-hearted one for those involved. Filled with the kind of playful banter, shared jokes, and mutual professional respect that, often develops among actors who have built a real rapport across multiple projects together. Taken as a whole, the production history of London Has Fallen tells the story of a film that overcame significant early instability, including 2 directorial departures within the span of just a few months before production began, to ultimately deliver a commercially successful, if critically divisive, entry in its franchise. The film's relatively modest budget, extensive multi-country shoots spanning London, Bulgaria, and India, and its blend of large-scale practical destruction with digital effects work all reflect the particular challenges and creative solutions that defined mid-budget action filmmaking during this era of Hollywood production. Meanwhile, the numerous anecdotes of on-set camaraderie, shared laughter, deleted comedic sequences, and playful behind-the-scenes banter between its cast members suggest that, whatever criticisms might be leveled at the finished film's script or subject matter, the experience of bringing it to life remained, for those involved, a genuinely enjoyable and collaborative one built on friendships that had already been firmly established during the making of its predecessor. London Has Fallen occupies a genuinely fascinating and often uncomfortable position within the broader landscape of post-9/11 action cinema, a film whose cultural and historical context proves, in many ways, just as significant as anything happening on screen. To understand the movie fully, it becomes necessary to look beyond the plot itself and examine the real-world anxieties, historical events, and political currents that shape both its content and its reception, because London Has Fallen did not exist in a vacuum. It arrived at a specific and deeply fraught moment in the relationship between Western governments and the broader Muslim world, a moment defined by ongoing military interventions, a rising wave of terrorist attacks across European cities, and an increasingly polarized political climate on both sides of the Atlantic. To begin with the film's most immediate real-world entanglement, the timing of its release became a genuine point of controversy well before audiences ever saw the finished product. The film's marketing rollout hit an unexpected obstacle when its trailer debuted on July 6, 2015, just one day before the 10th anniversary of the July 7, 2005 London bombings, a coordinated series of suicide attacks carried out by 4 British Islamist extremists who detonated explosives on 3 London Underground trains and a double-decker bus during the morning rush hour, killing 52 people and injuring several hundred more in what remains one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in modern British history. The proximity of the trailer's release to this solemn anniversary drew immediate and pointed criticism from groups directly connected to the tragedy, including representatives of the Tavistock Square Memorial Trust and the 7/7 Bombings Support Group, who characterized the timing as extremely insensitive, arguing that a fictional depiction of London under coordinated terrorist assault risked re-traumatizing survivors and family members who were, at that very moment, preparing to mark 10 years since losing loved ones or nearly losing their own lives in genuine, non-fictional violence. This backlash proved significant enough that the studio ultimately made the decision to push the film's release date back considerably, moving it away from its original October 2015 target, and eventually settling on the March 2016 release that audiences would come to know, a decision that reflected genuine sensitivity to the real trauma still very much alive within London's collective memory. Even as the film itself continued to traffic heavily in dramatized versions of exactly the kind of citywide terrorist violence that the 7/7 attacks represented in painful reality. This tension, between fictionalized spectacle and genuine historical trauma, runs through much of the broader cultural conversation that developed around London Has Fallen following its eventual release. The film arrived in theaters at a moment when Europe had experienced a significant and highly visible escalation in terrorist violence, most notably the November 2015 Paris attacks, in which coordinated assaults across multiple locations in the French capital killed 130 people. An event that had occurred just months before London Has Fallen's release and that inevitably colored how audiences and critics alike processed the film's own depiction of coordinated, multi-location terrorist violence against a major European capital. Several critics explicitly drew this connection in their reviews, characterizing the film as a kind of post-Paris cultural artifact, one reviewer specifically describing it as a work of terrorsploitation designed to capitalize on and amplify a climate of fear that had been genuinely heightened by recent tragedy. This context is essential to understanding why the film's reception proved so much harsher and more politically charged than that of its predecessor, Olympus Has Fallen, which had used North Korean operatives as its antagonists in 2013 and had, as a result, largely avoided the same kind of politically fraught cultural conversation that would come to define discussion of its sequel. The film's central antagonist, Amir Barkawi, and the broader depiction of his terrorist network became the focal point of an extensive and often heated critical debate regarding the film's politics and its portrayal of Islamic extremism. A significant portion of the professional critical establishment characterized the film as engaging in what several reviewers explicitly termed Islamophobic or xenophobic storytelling, pointing to specific elements of the script as evidence, including the film's depiction of an overwhelmingly Muslim terrorist network operating with minimal individual characterization beyond a broadly sketched desire for revenge, as well as several specific lines of dialogue that drew particular ire. Among the most frequently cited examples was a moment in which Mike Banning, addressing the terrorist mastermind's son over radio communication, tells him to return to what Banning crudely refers to as an invented, insulting name for a Central or South Asian nation. A line that numerous critics flagged as emblematic of the film's broader tendency to flatten and generalize an entire region and its peoples into an undifferentiated source of threat. Variety's review proved particularly pointed in this regard, describing the film using language that characterized it as reverting to what the reviewer termed familiar Islamophobia, framing the film's villains as an extension of long-standing post-9/11 anxieties about Muslim identity being conflated with terrorism. An association that media critics and academics alike have spent much of the past 2 decades examining and challenging within American popular culture. The Guardian offered similarly pointed criticism, highlighting what the publication characterized as reliance on familiar stereotypical shorthand in constructing its antagonists, arguing that this kind of characterization served to reinforce, rather than complicate or challenge, narratives that have historically painted Muslim communities collectively as inherently threatening or suspect in the wake of the September 11th attacks and the broader war on terror that followed. It is worth noting, in the interest of presenting a complete picture of this critical conversation, that the discourse surrounding the film's politics was not entirely one-sided, and some commentators pushed back against the intensity of the backlash. Certain critics and cultural commentators argued that the film should be understood primarily through the lens of genre convention rather than pointed political commentary, suggesting that the action thriller genre has long relied on simplified, larger-than-life villains regardless of their national or ethnic background, and that singling out London Has Fallen for particular condemnation risked applying an inconsistent standard compared to how the genre had treated other groups of antagonists. In decades past, these commentators also pointed to the film's own internal complexities as a partial counterargument to the harshest readings of its politics, noting that the film does, in brief moments, gesture toward humanizing its central antagonist, Barkawi, portraying him not simply as an inscrutable evildoer but as a father whose motivations stem directly from the very real trauma of having lost family members, including his own daughter, in a drone strike carried out by the very government his revenge campaign now targets. Some film analysts have gone further, arguing that this narrative choice, however underdeveloped it may be within the finished film's brisk, action-driven runtime, actually represents an attempt, whether fully successful or not, to acknowledge the genuine human cost of American drone warfare policy, situating Barkawi's monstrous actions within a recognizable cycle of violence and retribution rather than presenting him as an entirely inexplicable embodiment of pure evil. This reading suggests that London Has Fallen, whatever its significant flaws in execution, was at least gesturing toward an uncomfortable truth about the collateral consequences of the American drone program, even if the film's own action hero framework ultimately undercuts any sustained moral complexity by asking audiences to root unambiguously for Banning's brutal, body count-driven rescue mission by its conclusion. This brings the conversation naturally to the film's engagement with the real history and ongoing controversy surrounding American drone warfare, a policy tool that expanded dramatically during the presidential administration in power at the time of the film's production and release. The historical backdrop against which London Has Fallen's opening drone strike sequence takes place reflects a genuine and significant expansion of targeted killing operations that the American government carried out throughout the 2000s and 2010s, primarily in regions including Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Often outside of officially declared war zones and frequently under legal justifications that drew significant criticism from human rights organizations, legal scholars, and international bodies concerned about violations of national sovereignty and the risks posed to civilian populations. The use of armed drones as a central tool of American counterterrorism policy had, by the time London Has Fallen was in production, become one of the most controversial and closely scrutinized aspects of the broader war on terror, with reporting from organizations tracking drone strike casualties suggesting that a meaningful number of those killed in such strikes were civilians rather than the intended militant targets. A pattern that generated substantial diplomatic tension between the United States and the governments of the countries where such strikes took place, most notably Pakistan, whose government repeatedly protested the strikes as violations of its sovereignty even while reportedly cooperating with American intelligence services on certain operations behind the scenes. The film's decision to open with a drone strike that mistakenly, or at least tragically, kills the family members of its future antagonist during what should have been a joyous wedding celebration, taps directly into this real-world controversy, echoing numerous documented instances in which drone strikes targeting suspected militants have instead struck wedding parties, funerals, and other large civilian gatherings. Incidents that have been extensively documented by journalists and human rights investigators throughout the 2010s and that generated significant international condemnation each time they came to light. In this sense, London Has Fallen's fictional premise, however clumsily executed in its broader storytelling, draws on a very real and very painful category of documented tragedy, one that has fueled anti-American sentiment in numerous countries and has been cited by counterterrorism analysts as a contributing factor in radicalization narratives. Precisely the kind of cycle of violence begetting further violence that the film's plot, at least in its broad strokes, attempts to dramatize through Barkawi's transformation from grieving father to architect of mass terrorist violence. Beyond its engagement with drone warfare, London Has Fallen also inherits and extends a set of much older cultural anxieties surrounding the vulnerability of high-profile gatherings of world leaders, a genre of real-world security concern with deep historical roots that long predate the specific post-9/11 context of the film's production. Throughout modern history, state funerals and other large-scale diplomatic gatherings involving multiple heads of state have represented genuinely significant security challenges for host nations, given the extraordinary concentration of high-value targets present in a single location and the practical difficulty of maintaining airtight security across sprawling public ceremonies attended by enormous crowds. This concern is not merely theoretical or confined to fictional thrillers. History offers numerous genuine examples of funeral gatherings becoming sites of chaos, tragedy, or targeted violence, including incidents in which large public mourning ceremonies for prominent political or religious figures have experienced deadly crowd crushes, stampedes, or, in some documented cases, deliberate attacks carried out by extremist groups specifically because such gatherings offer an opportunity to inflict maximum casualties or symbolic damage against a concentration of political power and public grief simultaneously. This pattern of vulnerability associated with state funerals and mass political gatherings has continued to manifest in headline news well beyond the period of London Has Fallen's original release, underscoring that the film's central security nightmare scenario, however heightened and stylized for cinematic effect, reflects a genuine and enduring category of real-world concern that intelligence services and security planners continue to grapple with whenever major state occasions bring together significant numbers of high-profile political figures in a single, publicly accessible location. The film's broader place within the Has Fallen franchise also offers a revealing window into shifting cultural anxieties across the trilogy's production timeline. Olympus Has Fallen, released in 2013, centered its narrative around a fictional North Korean paramilitary assault on the White House, tapping into a different but related set of American anxieties concerning rogue state actors and the persistent, unresolved tensions of the Korean Peninsula. A conflict that has technically remained in a state of armistice rather than formal peace since the early 1950s. This choice of antagonist allowed the first film to explore themes of American vulnerability and heroism without engaging directly with the specific, highly charged discourse surrounding Islamic extremism and the broader Muslim world that had come to dominate American foreign policy conversation throughout the preceding decade. London Has Fallen's decision to shift its antagonists to a network explicitly coded as Islamic extremists, operating out of the broader Middle Eastern and South Asian region, represented a deliberate narrative choice that placed the film squarely within a much more contested and politically fraught cultural conversation. One that had already been the subject of extensive debate across American film and television throughout the 2000s and 2010s regarding the responsible and irresponsible portrayal of Muslim characters and communities on screen. The franchise's eventual third installment, Angel Has Fallen, released in 2019, notably shifted its focus once again, this time toward a plot involving domestic conspiracy and advanced drone technology rather than international terrorism. A change in direction that some industry observers have interpreted as at least a partial response to the sustained criticism London Has Fallen received regarding its handling of Islamic extremism as a narrative device, suggesting that the backlash generated by the second film's political content may have influenced subsequent creative decisions made in developing the franchise's next chapter. It is also worth situating London Has Fallen within the much longer historical lineage of American action cinema featuring lone wolf heroes single-handedly defeating overwhelming numbers of anonymous, largely faceless antagonists, a genre convention with roots stretching back through decades of Hollywood filmmaking. Some film critics and academics who have written about the movie have drawn explicit comparisons between Mike Banning's near-superhuman body count and the action heroes of the 1980s and 1990s, a period in which stars such as Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Chuck Norris built entire careers around similarly relentless, mechanically efficient depictions of a single American protagonist mowing down dozens or even hundreds of largely undifferentiated enemy combatants across a single film. This critical framework suggests that London Has Fallen, whatever its specific and legitimate criticisms regarding its choice of antagonist, is also participating in a much older and broader tradition within American popular cinema, one in which the specific national, ethnic, or ideological identity of the film's disposable enemy combatants has shifted across different historical periods to reflect whatever geopolitical anxiety happened to be most culturally resonant at the time of a given film's production, from Soviet agents during the Cold War era, to Latin American drug cartels and various rogue state actors throughout the 1980s and 1990s. To the post-9/11 emphasis on Islamic extremist networks that came to dominate the genre throughout the 2000s and into the following decade. The film's audience reception also offers a genuinely interesting case study in the sometimes significant gap that can emerge between professional critical opinion and general audience response, a gap that itself became a subject of cultural commentary following the film's release. While London Has Fallen received what can only be described as an overwhelmingly negative reception from professional film critics, with review aggregation services reflecting scores in the 20 to 30% range alongside a similarly low Metacritic score reflecting what that platform characterizes as generally unfavorable reviews. General moviegoing audiences responded considerably more warmly to the finished film. Audience polling conducted through CinemaScore, which surveys opening night moviegoers directly as they exit theaters, awarded the film an average grade in the A- range, identical to the score received by the first film in the franchise, indicating that those who actually paid to see the film in its opening days walked away considerably more satisfied than the professional critical consensus might suggest. This divergence between critical and audience reception became itself a subject of broader cultural commentary at the time, with some commentators framing it as evidence of a meaningful disconnect between the political sensibilities of professional film critics, who tend to be concentrated in major coastal media markets and who may hold more uniformly progressive views on questions of representation and political messaging in popular entertainment, and a broader general audience that, according to this line of argument, was less concerned with or less attuned to the specific political criticisms being leveled at the film's depiction of its antagonists, and more interested in the film's function as a straightforward, high-energy action thriller. This gap in reception, regardless of how one interprets its underlying causes, reflects a broader and recurring pattern that has played out repeatedly across numerous politically contentious action and thriller films throughout the 2010s, in which works receiving substantial criticism from professional critics for their handling of race, religion, or geopolitics have nonetheless found considerable commercial success and audience approval, a pattern that speaks to the sometimes significant disconnect between elite critical discourse and mainstream popular consumption of genre entertainment. Beyond the specific political controversies surrounding its content, London Has Fallen also holds a certain historical significance simply by virtue of the city it chose as its central setting and site of destruction. London stands as one of the world's most historically significant and culturally resonant capital cities, a metropolis whose landmarks, from St. Paul's Cathedral to Buckingham Palace to the Houses of Parliament, carry centuries of accumulated symbolic weight tied to British monarchy, governance, empire, and national identity. The film's decision to depict widespread, graphic destruction across so many of these iconic sites within a single narrative represents a particularly aggressive example of a broader subgenre within action and disaster filmmaking, sometimes referred to by critics as landmark destruction cinema, a category of films that derive significant portions of their visual spectacle from depicting the dramatic, often gleeful demolition of recognizable, beloved real-world locations. This subgenre has its own complicated cultural history, with critics periodically debating the psychological and cultural function of watching cinematic destruction visited upon real cities and their most treasured landmarks, some arguing that such imagery serves a kind of cathartic function for audiences processing genuine anxieties about vulnerability and safety in an age of terrorism, while others have raised concerns, particularly in the specific case of London Has Fallen, that depicting this kind of destruction against the backdrop of a city that had, within living memory, experienced genuine and devastating terrorist violence crossed an important ethical line between escapist entertainment and something considerably more uncomfortable. Taken together, all of these overlapping threads, the film's uneasy proximity to the real anniversary of the 7/7 bombings, its arrival and the immediate aftermath of the Paris attacks, its engagement with the genuinely controversial history of American drone warfare policy, its place within a decades-long tradition of shifting cinematic antagonists reflecting contemporary geopolitical anxieties, and its significant divergence between critical and audience reception, combined to make London Has Fallen a film whose cultural and historical significance extends considerably beyond its qualities, or lack thereof, as a piece of standalone entertainment. It stands as a genuine artifact of a particular and highly fraught moment in the broader relationship between Western popular culture, real-world terrorism, and the ongoing, deeply contested legacy of the War on Terror as it entered its second decade, offering both a window into the anxieties that shaped mainstream American action filmmaking during this period and a case study in the significant cultural and political controversies that can emerge when big-budget entertainment attempts to dramatize real, ongoing, and painful geopolitical conflicts for the purposes of popular spectacle.